The story of cattle is a long one. It begins thousands of years ago. The ancestor of modern cattle was the aurochs. Aurochs were large, wild animals. They roamed the grasslands of Europe, Asia, and Africa. These animals were much larger than the cattle we know today. Aurochs were strong and powerful. They were an important source of food for early humans. Humans hunted aurochs for their meat, hides, and bones. However, humans were beginning to learn new ways of interacting with animals. Instead of just hunting and killing, humans began to experiment with domestication. This would change the relationship between humans and cattle forever. Around 10,500 years ago, something remarkable happened. Humans in the Middle East began domesticating cattle. This was a turning point in human history. Domestication means taming animals for human use. Early farmers selected docile aurochs. They bred them over generations. Over time, these animals became smaller and more manageable. This was the beginning of domesticated cattle. The domestication of cattle spread slowly. It moved from the Middle East to other parts of the world. Cattle provided many benefits to early societies. They were a source of meat, milk, and hides. They also provided labor for plowing fields. Cattle played a vital role in the rise of ancient civilizations. In Mesopotamia, cattle were essential for agriculture. They were used to plow fields and thresh grain. They also provided milk, meat, and hides. Cattle were also important in ancient Egypt. Egyptians revered cattle as sacred animals. They associated them with several gods and goddesses. For example, the sky goddess Hathor was often depicted with cow horns. Cattle were used in religious ceremonies. They were also a symbol of wealth and status. The pharaohs kept large herds of cattle. They used them to feed their armies and to pay taxes. As civilizations grew, so too did the importance of cattle. Cattle were a key factor in the expansion of empires. They provided food and labor for armies on the move. They also played a role in trade and commerce. The Roman Empire, for example, relied heavily on cattle. They imported cattle from conquered territories. They used them to feed their growing population. The Romans also used cattle in their military campaigns. Cattle were also important in other parts of the world. In India, cattle have been revered for centuries. The cow is considered a sacred animal in Hinduism. It is a symbol of life and fertility. Cattle in myth and legend. Cattle are deeply intertwined with human culture and mythology. They feature prominently in the myths and legends of many different societies. These stories often reflect the importance of cattle in these cultures. In Greek mythology, for example, the god Zeus transformed himself into a white bull. He did this to abduct the princess Europa. This story illustrates the power and allure associated with cattle. Cattle also appear in the Bible. They are often used as symbols of wealth, strength, and prosperity. For instance, the story of Jacob's herd illustrates the importance of cattle in ancient Israel. A source of wealth and power. Throughout history, cattle have been a source of wealth and power. From ancient civilizations to medieval kingdoms, the ownership and control of cattle have played a crucial role in shaping societies. These animals were not just a source of food and labor, they were a symbol of economic strength and social status. Owning a large herd of cattle was a sign of status and prosperity. The more cattle one owned, the higher their standing in the community. Wealthy landowners and prosperous farmers were often those who had the largest herds, showcasing their economic power and influence. Cattle were a valuable commodity. They were not only essential for agricultural activities, but also served as a form of currency. In marketplaces, cattle were weighed and assessed, determining their value for trade and barter. They could be traded for other goods and services, whether it was for grains, tools, or even labor. Cattle were a versatile asset that facilitated trade and economic transactions. This made them indispensable in the daily lives of many communities. In many societies, cattle were used as a form of currency. This practice was widespread, from African tribes to European settlements. The value of cattle was universally recognized, making them a reliable medium of exchange. They were a measure of wealth. The number of cattle one owned was directly proportional to their wealth. This measurement was not just economic, but also social, as it determined one's influence and power within the community. They were used to pay dowries, fines, and taxes. In many cultures, Cattle were an integral part of important social transactions. Dowries often included cattle, symbolizing the wealth and status of the families involved. Similarly, fines and taxes were sometimes paid in cattle, underscoring their value in legal and governmental systems. Control over cattle and grazing land often led to conflicts and wars. The competition for these valuable resources could escalate into violent confrontations. Tribes and communities would go to great lengths to protect their herds and secure fertile grazing lands. The importance of cattle in shaping social structures is undeniable. Villages and communities often organized their lives around the care and management of cattle. This central role influenced everything from daily routines to long-term planning. In some cultures, cattle ownership determined social hierarchy. The more cattle one had, the higher their rank in the social order. This hierarchy was often rigid, with clear distinctions between those who owned cattle and those who did not. It influenced relationships between individuals and communities. Marriages, alliances, and even friendships could be affected by cattle ownership. The presence or absence of cattle in one's life was a significant factor in social interactions and community dynamics. The industrialization of cattle. The Industrial Revolution brought about significant changes in cattle farming. The demand for meat and dairy products increased in urban areas. This led to the development of new methods of cattle production. Factory farms emerged as a way to meet this growing demand. These large-scale operations focused on efficiency and profit. They often housed thousands of cattle in confined spaces. New technologies such as refrigeration and transportation networks facilitated the growth of the cattle industry. They allowed for the transport of meat and dairy products over long distances. Modern cattle farming and its impacts. Modern cattle farming has a significant impact on the environment. The scale and intensity of these operations have grown tremendously over the past few decades, driven by the increasing global demand for beef and dairy products. This growth, however, comes with a heavy environmental cost. Large-scale cattle operations contribute to deforestation, greenhouse gas emissions, and water pollution. Forests, particularly in tropical regions, are being cleared at an alarming rate to make way for grazing land and feed crop production. This deforestation not only destroys habitats but also releases significant amounts of carbon dioxide stored in trees. The demand for beef in particular has led to the clearing of vast tracts of rainforest for grazing land. These rainforests are vital for maintaining global biodiversity and regulating the climate. Their destruction has far-reaching consequences, including the loss of countless plant and animal species. Cattle farming is also a major contributor to methane emissions. Methane is produced during the digestive process of cattle and is released into the atmosphere. This gas is much more effective at trapping heat in the atmosphere than carbon dioxide, making it a potent greenhouse gas. Methane is a potent greenhouse gas. Its impact on global warming is over 25 times greater than that of carbon dioxide over a 100-year period. The large number of cattle raised for meat and dairy production means that methane emissions from this sector are substantial. It contributes to climate change. The accumulation of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere leads to global warming, which in turn causes a range of environmental issues such as melting ice caps, rising sea levels, and more extreme weather events. In addition, cattle farming requires large amounts of water and energy. Water is needed not only for the animals to drink, but also for growing the feed crops they consume. Energy is used in various stages of production, from operating machinery to processing and transporting meat and dairy products. This puts a strain on natural resources. In many regions, water scarcity is already a critical issue, and the high water demands of cattle farming exacerbate this problem. The intensive use of energy also contributes to the depletion of fossil fuels and increases greenhouse gas emissions. There is growing concern about the ethical implications of factory farming. The conditions in which many cattle are raised are often far from humane, with animals kept in crowded and unsanitary environments that can lead to stress and disease. Animal welfare advocates raise concerns about the treatment of cattle in these intensive systems. They argue for better living conditions, more space, and access to the outdoors for the animals. The push for more ethical farming practices is gaining momentum as consumers become more aware of the impacts of their food choices. The future of cattle. The future of cattle farming is uncertain. With climate change and fluctuating market demands, farmers are facing unprecedented challenges. The traditional methods of raising cattle are being scrutinized more than ever before. There is growing awareness of the environmental and ethical concerns associated with industrial cattle production. Factory farming contributes significantly to greenhouse gas emissions, deforestation, and water pollution. The welfare of the animals in these systems is also a major concern, as they often live in cramped and inhumane conditions. Consumers are increasingly interested in alternative protein sources. This shift is driven by a combination of health, environmental, and ethical considerations. People are becoming more conscious of what they eat and the impact their choices have on the planet. Plant-based meat alternatives are becoming increasingly popular. These products are designed to replicate the taste, texture, and nutritional profile of traditional meat, making them an appealing option for those looking to reduce their meat consumption without sacrificing flavor. These products made from plants mimic the taste and texture of meat. Innovations in food technology have made it possible to create plant-based meats that are almost indistinguishable from their animal-based counterparts. This has opened up new possibilities for sustainable eating. They offer a more sustainable and ethical alternative to traditional meat production. By reducing reliance on animal agriculture, we can decrease our environmental footprint and promote better animal welfare. However, cattle will likely continue to play an important role in many parts of the world. In numerous cultures, cattle are not just a source of food, but also a symbol of wealth and tradition. They are integral to the livelihoods of millions of people, providing essential nutrition and economic stability. They provide essential nutrition and livelihoods for millions of people. In many developing regions, cattle are a critical resource, offering not just meat and milk, but also labor and manure for farming. The challenge lies in balancing these needs with the imperative to protect our environment. Finding ways to make cattle farming more sustainable and ethical is crucial for the future. Innovations in farming techniques such as regenerative agriculture and improved animal welfare practices hold promise. By embracing these changes, we can ensure that cattle farming remains viable while also safeguarding our planet for future generations.